afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum with me, your host, Imperial Dane. And we're here about to talk about something a bit particular. Well, I am. You're here to listen, obviously. And that is the new faction that's sort of recently mentioned and pretty much confirmed by Relic. Now, of course, right here, we don't know what it is. It's not out either yet right now. Of course, just a heads up there as well, just in case someone is confused. But, you know, neither do we know what it is, nor is it out right now. We do have some suspicions as to what it is, and that tends to be all signs in that gap point towards the British, the Commonwealth, those guys with the Cromwells and the Fireflies. And you might ask yourself, well, how do we know that? This partly due to, well, basically stuff that was found in the files a few months ago that rather hinted heavily at the British, basically British commanders, British stuff, and also bits that actually hinted at intact the Roman front. No, that's could also have been the Americans, but you know, they could also hint versus the British. But overall, there were found mentions of British commanders, and that, of course, then with the new faction, which, by the way, when Relic showed off its roadmap for it, rather sort of looked a bit like a British helmet. So, of course, that could have been sheer coincidence. That could have been something to throw us off the trail. Who knows? But also, then, when you suddenly consider another part, if you sort of consider it's just a new faction for this game, what will fit in the most? The British. I mean, they'll sort of be there alongside the Americans. That'll work out. They were one of the sort of larger powers there in Europe. So, you know, it makes sense. They would also be one of the large ones, you know, a lot of their own equipment. You know, Cromwells, Challengers, Fireflies, Achilles, the Comet, Bren Carriers. Hang on. Bren Carriers, Wasps, Churchill heavy tanks, Bren guns, Piats, all that. I mean, that'd be a lot more there to actually work with, and, you know, certainty there. And of course, that might, well, what's half of all this stuff, folks? I mean, the Comet was a later war tank the British sort of added in. Basically, it was a more up-armoured Cromwell with a slightly sort of shortened 17-pounder gun, but with improved high-explosive shells, basically meaning it was actually basically more up-armoured Firefly with better anti-infantry capabilities, which rather makes it rather neat in a sense. And the Achilles, which ultimately was basically actually an M10 Wolverine with a 17-pounder gun. And of course, you're wondering, doesn't it sound like the British had a bit of a fetish for the 17-pounder gun? Yes, they did. They pretty much tried to add as much as possible, for which also came the A30 Challenger, which is basically a sort of enlarged Cromwell with a 17-pounder gun in it as well. But some thoughts and bits there. There's also things like the Wasp, which was basically a Bren carrier with a flamethrower added to it, which could find itself added to the game as well for sort of extra benefit. Of course, you'd have the Bren guns as well there, sort of add to the infantry sections. You'd have the Piat, because, well, the British never really used the bazooka. You'd have Sten guns for light machine gun action. One could imagine, you know, British commandos adding in. No airborne, since, you know, Arnhem happened. All that. But commanders, one could imagine. One could even imagine, you know, they might even add in, say, some Canadian troops, or, I don't know, Poles? Maybe not those. I don't know. But there would certainly be a few sort of additions there. Of course, there'd be their own armoured cars, like the Humber, I believe, and some other bits there. So, I mean, there'd be a bit to choose from overall in sort of flushing out the British. Of course, the question is, how will they do them in comparison to the Americans and the Soviets? Of course, that's a bit more the tricky part. And that is a bit more the tricky part. I mean, they'd probably not redo the Commonwealth, obviously, from the first Coming Heroes. There might, of course, be a few things to sort of make it in there, again, sort of in terms of design. Probably not the trucks, but I could imagine the infantry section, sort of being a flexible unit, could reappear with a sort of recon section with its own marksman. Of course, working probably a bit more like the Pathfinders here. I mean, that could very well be an option there for the British. Sort of be added into the game. Might see some officers in one way or the other, but again, probably not quite the same fashion as we saw it in the first game. I mean, how they're sort of fully going to work, or would work, obviously, because again, I mean, it could be anything, but again, I'm rather betting on the British. I mean, of course, is always going to be sort of the question. I mean, I don't think they're going to sort of, you know, as swiftly taking as the Soviets and the Americans. I think they might be a bit slower, not very much slow in terms of taking. They're probably going to be a bit more flexible than that, but they're not quite going to be the Americans or the Soviets either. They would obviously have something sort of more safely locked away at a tight sort of deeper end tier, which of course is not going to be quite as easy to sort of reach. And I could imagine a Comet tank being there. Maybe the Achilles would be available early alongside a Cromwell and some other bits before that. So that would sort of give them a bit there. Then of course they'd have their infantry sections, maybe a recce section, sort of added in for some bits there. They'd have sappers, Bren carriers may be upgraded to Wasps for sort of flamethrower action on a small little chassis. And some other bits there, but overall, of course, it's a bit hard to predict. Of course, I'm not going to sort of make too high many because, I mean, overall, Relic has shown themselves quite capable of surprise. Not with the Oberkommando West, obviously, but with the Americans, there were certainly a lot of things there I did not expect when they came up with the Western Front Army. So, I mean, I can't really feel myself playing too clever there when it comes to the Commonwealth either, because Relic could surprise just as well there. I mean, if there was another German faction, obviously, one probably could have a lot less to be surprised about. At least positively. But of course, then you might ask yourself, well, aren't the Germans going to get anything? The Axis. And here's the problem, you can't really add a lot more to them. I mean, partly because there's basically not really a lot of other equipment you can sort of put in without, creating a really further mess of the faction beyond even the Oberkommando West at the moment, which really wouldn't be fun either, because you just don't really have much weapon either, sort of, with it, they can't overlap with everything else, so that's a bit of a problem there. And that guy, you're going to get people complaining about that, so it's not really much of an option. And you can't really add any other nations because A, either they weren't fighting anymore, like the Italians, or like the Hungarians, they were largely relying on German equipment as well. Panthers, Panzer IVs, MGs, Panzerschrecks, Panzerfausts. I mean, they had a bit of their own, the Hungarians, but overall, they were largely similar to the Germans in a lot of ways. I mean, for example, like a lot on Hetzers, for example, as assault guns. So, I mean, it's a bit more tricky there, for example, sort of adding something for the Germans. Not to say something couldn't be added, but it'd either have to be, fresh commanders, so they'd have to add in an entirely new system. Like, say, I don't know, sub-factions, so instead we get variants in an army. Say, for example, a variant on the Oberkommando West, like, say, I know, the Hermann Göring, or a Panzerlehr variant, where certainly you'd say infantry would be swapped out. So, for example, instead of Volksgrenadiers, it'd be, Panzerlehr, Panzergrenadiere. Or Kettenwerfers might be switched out with something. We could, for example, see the, infant half-track run out for a regular half-track, for example. Sturmtiger could be replaced by Grille. And some other bits there, for example. I mean, that way you could sort of have more variations on a theme, but still overall it'd still be the same. You could also have a lot more of the same units, but then, for example, they might have different abilities. For example, a Panzerlehr infantry gun might instead have a smokescreen instead of the hollow charge rounds, for example. And Fallschirmjäger might get a regular smoke grenade instead of the frangible. Well, or they might not even be available to the Panzerlehr in terms of doctrines. I mean, there could be a sort of few options there in that regard, and same with the Wehrmacht. You could, for example, have a Großdeutschland. You could have, well, the Hermann Göring Fallschirmpanzerdivision. You could do a lot of things there. And again, for the Oberkommando West, you could even have, the Marine Sturmdivision, having all of these added out and replaced instead with, well, Kriegsmarine sailors formed into infantry. Hetzers instead of the Jagdpanzer. Things like that could work out. That way you could even fit in the Hungarians as an example. Have them be a sub-variation on the Wehrmacht. So that could work more, though, I think, there, if you're sort of going to add in more Axis stuff. But beyond that, it's going to be a bit tricky without basically creating a silly mess. Which overall I don't think really would benefit anyone besides those who are so absolutely consumed with quantity rather than quality that they don't care really much about the game in reality. Which of course is just a bit sad. But beyond that, again, bet is very much on the British and some of the sort of the better equipment. And again, for those saying, well, why not Africa? Because, well, this isn't Africa. And if they're going to do Africa, they're going to need more than just adding in one faction. So that's obviously not going to be a really, go-to solution. And as for those again asking Italians, again, wrong period. Again, by this point, the Italian army has ceased to function. It was basically just small elements supporting the Germans here and there, but nothing that sort of worked like an independent army at all. At all. I'm just, emphasizing that it wouldn't work. And regarding the Pacific, Relics pretty much ruled that one out for several reasons, including one, they're published as Japanese, and the Japanese might not quite be happy about digging that one up. For example, I wager. Though of course it also helps them when you put something in comparison to the Italian army. The Japanese army was kinda worse, which is a bit of a feat in its own right. But there you go. Overall, as for the other things, again, figured it was something, and some people might, have like some thoughts on what they might be able to expect, what they sort of to look forward to potentially, and of course, just some thoughts what could be done with the Axis. Again, those are just thoughts, and of course, I'm right now sure Relic watching this are laughing at me and going, silly Dane, that's not how it's going to work at all. Or they might of course go, shit, he's on to us, we've got to change things up massively. can't be outdone by that Dane. So just a few thoughts there, but again, hopefully it has given people some ideas onto it and what to expect, maybe, or at least just sort of gotten some interest there. So hopefully, again, this video has been of enjoyment to you and enlightenment. If it did, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Of course, feel free to provide comments and, and discuss, of course, all of this. Discuss, what would you like to see, for example, in a new faction, and what wouldn't you like to see in a new faction? Of course, what would you like to see, for example, with the Axes? What would you like them to have? And of course, with this sub-faction idea, be something you'd like to see Relic do, because, who knows. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and see you another time. Bye!